Hello. So this year has been pretty wild for me so far, as those of you who tune into this channel more regularly will know. However, a few weeks ago, I received an email that took things up a notch for me. You see, there is one camera that I have lusted after since the first time that I've seen it here on YouTube, in fact. And that camera that I'm talking about is the Hasselblad 907X, this guy here. Now, it's no secret that Hasselblad is working together with a number of photographers, both here on YouTube and also elsewhere on social media, to spread the word about their medium format cameras. But not even in my wettest dreams could I have imagined that they would actually get in touch with me. But they did. And after I got the offer to keep this camera and lens in exchange for some content here on YouTube, I screamed yes so loud that they could probably hear me over in Sweden. And so a few weeks later, this beauty arrived at my doorstep, along with the XCD 55mm f2.5 lens. But yes, that means that this video is indeed sponsored by Hasselblad, in the sense that I do get to keep this camera and lens, which honestly for me is just a dream come true. Even though I'm not looking forward to filing my taxes for 2025. Anyway, with this being a Hasselblad, obviously the name comes with a bunch of heritage, but also with a load of expectations. This camera cannot just be a pretty face, especially at that price point. It also needs to be a great and even outstanding camera, even beyond its looks. And so that is what I was really curious to find out. Is this just a nostalgic throwback camera that is all looks and nothing else? Or is this genuinely worth the price? With that being said, this video is not a review. I've only had this camera for a couple of weeks so far. And so this video is just about using the camera out in the real world, because I actually took it on a trip to Italy recently. So, what kind of trip are we talking about here? Well, with my content deadlines fast approaching, I decided to take a Friday off and hop on my Triumph Scrambler 900 and ride it to Lake Como in northern Italy for a weekend. Just me, the Hasselblad and my Triumph, plus obviously a bunch of gear to film the whole journey. Since I was traveling on my motorcycle, I was sadly not able to take my wife and baby boy with me this time around, and so after waving goodbye to them, I have fired up the old girl and headed off towards Italy. Even with the most direct route, my journey was roughly 450 kilometers long, and I decided to add a little detour to the ass-grinding madness and went over the Alps on the Gotthard Pass instead of through the Alps via the Gotthard Tunnel. Getting to the Gotthard Pass was just a breeze, and I got super lucky with the weather up in the Alps as well. Nothing but blue skies with a few fluffy clouds and the most comfortable temperatures for a bike ride like this. At the top of Gotthard Pass, I stopped to take a few quick photos with the Hasselblad. Nothing special though, but just some snaps to commemorate the journey. Most importantly though, I also got myself a coffee and a bratwurst, which was burnt on the outside and barely done on the inside, but up there, after many hours of riding that beautiful Triumph, it tasted like a Michelin star gourmet meal. It was glorious. And so was the way back down the Alps on the other side. I stopped a few more times that day to take some more photos, but overall I made pretty good progress. The closer I got to Italy though, the more grueling the heat got. That day temperatures would peak at around 38 degrees Celsius, which is about 100 degrees Fahrenheit for my American bros, and even though my motorcycle leather jacket has great ventilation, it felt like riding through a thick, hot soup even at highway speeds, and it was pure torture once I got into some more built-up areas and was reduced to just regular city speeds. But eventually, after a full day of riding, I made it to my Airbnb. And so, on Saturday, after a good night of sleep, I got up bright and early. I had charged all of my camera batteries back up, and at around 8 AM I was ready to hit the road. The first place I wanted to go to was a little lakeside town called Chernobbio, which is just a few kilometers north of Como itself. with that, welcome to Chernobbio. Beautiful little lakeside city. I'm in the, what would you call it? At the lakefront right now. And the plan now is to take out the Hasselblad and take a couple of photos. But just, by the way, I can hardly tell you how much fun it is to whiz around this Triumph Scrambler here at Lake Como. It's a perfect machine for that. And so I broke out the Hasselblad and started shooting. The first few shots were pretty terrible, as is often the case, but it only took me a few minutes to get in the zone, which was probably in part because I was alone and could actually completely focus on my photography, but probably also because of the Hassi. You see, the Hasselblad 907X does not have a viewfinder, but instead it has this big, beautiful tilting screen, which is a throwback to old analog Hasselblads with a waist-level viewfinder. A quick word on the screen though, so I obviously used it out in the open in the full-on Italian summer sunlight, so essentially the worst kind of conditions for a screen of this sort, and for me it worked perfectly fine. So fine in fact that I didn't even bother to check the menus to realize that I had set my screen brightness to only 50%, which mind you, on the other hand, was pretty useful to conserve some battery. However, with that being said, I noticed that on the footage that I recorded of me using this camera out and about and shooting with it, it often looks like you can barely make out what's on the screen. But that is more so because of how my Sony ZV-E1 captured the whole thing, and that was certainly not so much the case for me when I was using the camera out in the field. Anyway, back to Chernobbio. I wandered around the lakeside area for a bit and took a few photos here and there. And my god, they look great on the screen in terms of color and everything, but it's only when you can inspect your photos on a larger screen that you get to really appreciate the amount of detail that this 100 megapixel medium format sensor delivers. It's outrageous. And just saying, those 16-bit RAW files are on another level when it comes to how much you can push and pull and fine-tune your images. But that's a topic for another time. I also played around with the X-Pan crop here and there, which was something that I was particularly interested in with this camera. After a while I decided to go a bit further into the actual village itself and explore around the area, and I took a few images here and there. Eventually though, I ended up grabbing a quick cappuccino and a bite to eat and made my way back to my Triumph. Now I gotta head to Cadenabbia to make it in time for the ferry, which leaves in just over an hour, which should be possible, but I expect that I will most likely just stop here and there, take a couple of photos. Yeah, let's see. Ooh, Moto Guzzi. That being said, I cannot wait to hop back onto this bad boy. I just adore this motorcycle. I actually ended up not stopping anywhere on my way because I was so short on time that I barely made it to the ferry port. It was, however, a beautiful ride. You know, with most places you'd be lucky to find maybe a few spots here and there that are truly beautiful, but it usually never takes too long until you get to a, say, less beautiful area. That is, however, not the case around Lake Como. When you are riding around Lake Como, every area, every road and every little village is just lovely and aesthetically pleasing in its own right. It's a feast for the eyes. And yes, riding around on a motorcycle is in fact by far the best way to enjoy the experience. Anyway, I made it in time to the port at Cadenabbia about 10 minutes before the ferry arrived, which would take me over to Bellagio. I could of course have taken the road to Bellagio instead, but I wanted to take the ferry because the view you get when you are approaching Bellagio from the lake is just something else. so when I got off the ferry and into Bellagio, I quickly found a spot to park my Triumph and got straight to work. I wandered around for a bit and took a few photos here and there. While Bellagio is incredibly beautiful, it is also completely overrun with tourists, which can make getting those shots a bit challenging at times. Eventually, I decided to grab a bite to eat and to stay in the shade to recover from the scorching Italian midday sun for a while. Okay, well, that was delicious, and I also just put on a new layer of sunscreen. Hope that will help, and hope that will even get into my skin and not just evaporate. But anyway, it's incredibly hot, and going with that full-size pizza was definitely not the right move. Not because it wasn't delicious, because in fact it was, but oh my god, I do need a nap now. Yeah, so let's go shoot some photos. I then decided to make my way up and down the hillside that Bellagio is built on to get to the other side, which is a lot less busy.
Okay, so this is true dedication to the course now. I'm climbing up these stairs. It is piping hot. I'm not made for this stuff, especially not after eating like a full-on pizza. God damn it. Let's hope for some good photos though. I do, however, love this guy. Oh my days.
I strolled around the area for a while and did my best to not look like a total creep while shooting at the bathing spot, and overall just took my time to enjoy a bit of shade here and there, as well as those lovely views. Eventually though, I just couldn't take the heat any longer. Temperatures approached about 40 degrees Celsius that day, and so with sweat coming from absolutely every pore of my body, I eventually had to give in and head back to my Triumph to get back to the AC that was waiting for me at the Airbnb.
Well, I am back with my noble steed now. Time to head back to Como. This is going to be one hot ride. Can't wait to sit on this 900cc engine with your high exhaust. Perfect.
The ride back was just as beautiful as the ride to Cadenabbia, albeit in a completely different way, because the road that I took back was somewhat off the main tourist roads, and so things were a lot less busy and there were noticeably more locals around just doing their thing. And so, even despite the heat, I just could not resist and had to stop many times to take some more photos. Eventually, I made it back to the Airbnb, downed about a gallon of water and showered and got some rest. Later in the evening then, I decided to head back into Como for one last sunset photography mission. And yes, I did get some ice cream, but even someone like me who is basically half pig, half human could not stomach the idea of getting dinner in that sort of heat, especially after downing a full pizza for lunch earlier. And so I just strolled around Como for some time, just taking it all in, feeling the air cooling off as the sun started to disappear behind the mountains. And of course, I took some more photos with the Hasselblad.
this was lovely. But now it's time to head back to the Airbnb. That's all my motorcycle and helmet are still where I left them. And then it's time for a nap. Power blackout, I call it.
And that concludes my full Saturday at Lake Como. Now, the following day, I got up super early in order to head out of Como and back home before temperatures got too high once again. That Sunday then, I had to make the full 450 kilometer journey back home again. And even though riding that far on a single day can be a literal pain in the butt at times, it's also just the best. And so I decided to go the long way around again and went up the Gotthard Pass on my way back as well. And again, it was just stunning. Those views just never get old, and after roughly 36 hours in that scorching Italian heat, it felt like entering heaven with those cool temperatures up in the Alps. To celebrate the successful trip, I treated myself to yet another bratwurst and took a few more photos on the Hasselblad on the top of Gotthard Pass again, before eventually making my way back down the Alps through Switzerland and back home. So, what can I say? It was, of course, quite the experience. I mean, riding on my Triumph through Switzerland is already a treat, but riding my Triumph around Lake Como was well worth the entire trip in and of itself. That aside, let's talk about the star of the show real quick, the Hasselblad 907X 100C. What can I say? This camera was pretty much the perfect fit for this type of trip and location. Just in terms of the aesthetics and the old worldly yet modern vibes that this 907X exudes, it was a match made in heaven at Lake Como. Now, talking about the aesthetics, even people who do not care about cameras at all will realize immediately that this one is special. And that's not just a bold statement, that's something that I actually know for a fact because I got approached by a number of people, just random people on the street, but also like cashiers at supermarkets and waiters at restaurants who complimented me on that camera, and also my wife, who I can assure you does not care about any of my cameras, not even my Leicas. She always compliments me on how good this camera looks when I'm out using it. However, with that being the case, that obviously leads us to the question of whether or not this camera draws too much attention to itself, which can be an issue when you're out and about doing street photography. And from my experience, when I was not sitting somewhere with the Hasselblad on the table or just standing around with it, but rather just using it, especially when I was using it with the screen tilted up, so in a waist level sort of position, which I was doing like 95% of the time, I would say that it was actually the opposite, meaning that people probably noticed me a lot less than they would have noticed me if I was using any of my other cameras. And I think that is in huge part just because you are not directly facing the people that you are taking photos of. You're just looking down on a screen, and we are so accustomed nowadays to people looking down on their screens, on their phones, that I don't know, people just don't think anything of it, I guess. Now, you can obviously do pretty much the same thing with any other camera, at least if it has a tilt screen and you can just shoot from waist height. But there is something to be said about a camera that is made in a way with the ergonomics and everything that just invites you to do that. And it feels just right. And it feels just like the way this camera is meant to be used. Because with most other cameras, even if they do have a tilt screen, for the most part, using them from waist height sort of feels wrong, at least in my opinion. In regard to the image quality, I mean, it's a 100 megapixel medium format camera that shoots 16-bit RAWs with modern optics. What do you expect? The images out of these cameras are insane in terms of color and detail. This camera has probably the best skin tones that I've ever seen, even straight out of camera from any manufacturer. And yes, the sharpness and the depth you get with a setup like this is a significant step up, even coming from a full frame 60 megapixel sensor. Other than that, I really do like how this camera operates. The overall button layout is super clean and simple, and the same is certainly true for the menus, which worked great with that gigantic touchscreen. By the way, battery life was also great. I only own a single battery for the 907X, and I only recharged it at the Airbnb in the evenings, and it was no problem getting through the day on a single charge. I did, however, put the camera into standby every time I was not shooting with it, but still holding it in my hand, simply because I was afraid that I would run out of battery eventually and had to recharge it. And I mean, I only had one full day at Lake Como, and so I certainly wanted to make the most of it and not spend my time recharging my camera. Using the 55mm XCD lens was also just perfect for this sort of trip. It's a 43mm equivalent in full frame terms, and certainly a focal length that I have to get used to a bit more, but it's really growing on me, and it's probably the most true to life and most versatile mid-range focal length that you can choose. And you know, also just in terms of the size of this setup, I mean, look at it. It's just perfect for a travel camera. Yes, it's a bit heavier than your average full frame camera, but with this form factor, it just takes up a single slot in the camera inlay of my backpack, which easily left enough room for some accessories and my Sony ZV-E1, which I used for capturing video. So, in conclusion, this has been a great trip and a great experience overall, and I'm very much looking forward to using this camera a lot more, because it is actually a dream camera of mine and it is fantastic to use. It's super fun while you're using it. It makes you sort of fall even deeper in love with photography, and once you get back to your computer and you actually get to see the images and edit them, it's just a joy. The amount of detail that you get out of those raw files, which mind you are about 220 megabytes a pop, but well worth the storage space. Oh yeah, and just as a side note, this camera actually comes with 1 terabyte of integrated storage, so I did not even have a card in this slot. I do not even own a CF Express card, to be honest, but why would I, since this has 1 terabyte of storage? That is plenty for me, and so yeah, well worth the storage nightmare with those files, in my opinion. Anyway, that's all I got for you today. I hope this was interesting to you. If you want to see more photos taken on the Hasselblad or just follow along what I'm doing, hop over to Instagram and feel free to follow me there too. Thanks again to Hasselblad for giving me this camera, and there is certainly more content to come about this camera. But I see you in another video. Until then, take good care.